Welcome, everyone, to Conversations with Women Like Me. I'm Julie Fairhurst, and I am the book coach of a program called Women Like Me, where women write their chapters or their personal stories in a chapter in our books. And today we are with the lovely, lovely Guelda Redman, and she wrote in chapter 4 of book 6, this one here, Women Like Me, Healing and Acceptance. And I'm just going to start off by telling you a little bit about her and a little bit about her bio, and then we're going to dive into her story. So her chapter is called A Broken Mind: Our Journey with Severe Mental Illness. Guelda Redman lives in Chilliwack, British Columbia, on a 2.5 acres with her husband, daughter, and daughter's family. She is an animal lover and keeps alpacas, sheep, goats, poultry, as well as her dogs and cats. I got to come up and see your farm. Currently, she's caring for her 2 sweet grandkids during the weekdays and her 95-year-old mom full-time. Life never slows down, but she wouldn't have it any other way. While navigating a schizophrenia diagnosis for her son, and she also developed severe depression herself. Learning more about mental illness and how it can affect you has been a roller coaster experience, to say the least. Guelda currently sits on the board of directors for the British Columbia Schizophrenia Society Foundation. So welcome, and thank you for being here. This is your story it's very enlightening. And just really, it's I don't know. Well, let's talk about it, and we'll let everybody figure it out for themselves, because it's a very eye-opening and enlightening story. So why don't we start off by you telling us, why did you decide to write your story?
I really wanted to start writing it because when you start out in this journey, there's so little information. Like you say, it's very eye-opening because we don't know. It's not a common topic. And so the fear, the self, you're immediately thinking you did something wrong. So it's something that makes you feel shame right away. And it's very hard to reach out for help. And so what I wanted to do was share my journey, and hopefully it will help somebody else's journey a little bit, because if they can know right off the bat, it's not your fault. You did not do anything wrong. You did not cause it. That's a huge lift off of your shoulders.
Yes.
And I also, the media it portrays severe mental illness so horribly.
Mm-hmm.
And, making it look like they're very violent, like they're just, like there's no hope. And I want people to know that that is not the case. There is hope. And we know there is a journey of recovery available to everybody. It's going to look different for everybody, and the level of recovery looks different for everybody, but there is hope. There's always hope. So, never give up.
Yeah. Well, throughout your story, you can certainly tell that you and your family went through a lot, but you didn't give up. And from what I can tell from your story, there's been some positive outcomes, and that's good. When you were just talking, I was thinking, like, so as a parent, if your child's experiencing any of these issues or diagnosis, I can see how they feel guilty, and maybe does that stop people from reaching out, do you think? Like, does that stop people?
It stops them from sharing. And I think that there's a lot of knowledge is power, and there's a lot of power if we, as the people who have gone through it, can come together and start educating, teachers, police officers, university professors, everywhere where our kids probably are, the job places where if all of a sudden they have someone that's just acting odd, they just have a bit of better idea, right? But it takes our voices to say that, the police coming in and manhandling somebody who's having a psychotic event is not helpful, and all it does is exacerbate the fear that they are already feeling. And so I think that there's just huge power in all of us being able to share our stories and being together and getting the voice out and advocating for our kids or loved ones, whatever, whoever it is, just to be able to advocate. And I think it's very hard if it's only one or two voices that are sort of trying to wade through all of that. But, there's 1 in 100 people have schizophrenia. That is a lot.
That is a lot. I didn't
So
realize the statistics were that high.
exactly, right?
Wow.
And so that's like 50,000 people in British Columbia that have schizophrenia, but they each have 2 parents. They each have 4 grandparents. It's and siblings, and that touches a lot of people. That's a lot of voices.
Yes.
That could be standing up and saying, we have to do better for these people. We have to do better.
So what do you think the main issue is then, like with, say, let's just say the medical or the medical, what do you think, like if someone's having an episode and they go to the hospital, like, why do you think, because I know through your story, it took a lot for your son to get diagnosed properly.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think that problem is? Like, what's the block there?
Well, one of the big issues with schizophrenia, as you were saying, they often don't realize they're ill.
Right.
So, and that's called anagnosia. Oh gosh, I can never say that word right, but it's a big word. It's a tough word, yeah. And it basically means they have a lack of insight. So they have no insight into their own illness. So number one, as a parent, when your child is getting ill and you're taking them to, like we took my son to a counselor, but he was not truthful to them because he didn't believe he was ill.
Oh.
So he's not even telling them everything that's happening. And so they're turning around and they're saying, he's just being a normal teenager. And so I think at the first level is that, when they're doing their interviews with the patients, is the parents have to be involved.
Yes.
They have to be part of the initial, because my son would not tell them things that were going on that I saw that were going on, because he saw them completely differently and he saw them as truth, whereas I knew they weren't truth. Right. So I think family involvement has to be there. They have to be part of the diagnosis process. There's also that whole piece about the Privacy Act, which comes in so hard for parents, because there's a lot of health professionals that just basically have a blanket. Nope, we're not talking to you about it. We're not talking to you about it. And the fact is that if the information is in the best interest, is like it's critical to the patient's outcomes,
yeah,
they can and should be sharing it.
Yes.
But a lot of healthcare professionals are just like, nope, it's just a blanket. I'm not allowed to do it. I'm not going to do it. So there actually are advocates for that. If you were running into that, there's advocates you can go to get help to get that information.
Well, that's good to know. Yeah, I can, yeah, it's, it makes sense that they're not, maybe they're embarrassed or they're ashamed or they don't want to, I guess it's kind of like an alcoholic. Oh, well, how often do you drink? Oh, well, not very much, like that's the thing, right?
True.
And until they get rock bottom And that's when they open up and they say, okay, look, okay, actually, I'm, I'm not well. And so I think that the same kind of thing, I think, that goes through, but you're right. I think that they do need to speak to the parents, because you're the one seeing it.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
see it very differently than what possibly the person who's experiencing it is seeing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
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 And I've heard that from other parents where they said, I took my son or daughter to a psychiatrist. They had a meeting and the psychiatrist said, there's nothing wrong with you. And they're going like, what do I do? And I said, you need to go in the meeting. You need to get in the meeting and you need to say, this is what's happening. And we were really lucky because my son did let us in all the meetings. And so, but every single meeting, the psychiatrist would say, so how are you doing? And he would go, I'm fine. And then I would run through my whole list of every single thing that had happened through the week. It wasn't fine. Right. So, and I think that's why, I mean, relatively to a lot of people, he got on a medication that worked for him relatively quickly.
Yeah.
But he also saw a psychiatrist very, very often, because we were very lucky that we were in a program where we saw the psychiatrist more often.
Yeah.
But the other thing is when somebody calls the police on somebody that's having a psychotic episode, if the officers don't have training in that area, then they can exacerbate the situation. We always hear about unfortunate incidences with someone who has a mental health issue and the police, and it's not, it's just a lack of training, really. It's a lack of training. And so but who better to train them than hello.
Yes.
Like, I've dealt with it. I can tell you from my perspective what it is, and then mental health professionals who really specifically deal with it and know what they're talking about.
Well, I found one of the most uh one part of your story that I remember that you wrote that really, really kind of struck home, about what your son was dealing with. And that was, he was living away from home. And then I don't know, did he go missing, or all of a sudden you found him in his old room in the house?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he was actually living and working. We were actually in Langley at the time, and he was living in Chilliwack. And and yeah, Saturday morning we get up, we're puttering around the house, because at this point, like, no one was living at home anymore. It was woohoo.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then I went downstairs because the laundry room was down there, and his old bedroom was down there, and he's laying on the bed, and there's something that once you see it, you would know what I'm talking about, but it's very hard to even imagine what the eyes look like in someone who is dealing with psychosis. It's like they're black and hollow and haunted, and it's like you can tell right away from the eyes that something is really, really wrong. But yeah, so he had been dealing with it for a while, I think, hearing voices and stuff, but hadn't really admitted it to anybody. And but it's they don't just have the hallucinations, they also have delusions. So his delusion was that people could hear his thoughts.
Oh.
And you imagine how scary that would be, because I would not want someone to hear every single thing I think, because they would just think, what a horrible person. And that's what he thought, that everyone thought he was the worst person on earth. And so when these voices started, the dog is pushing her way in. When the voices started, they were telling him, everybody hates you. Everybody wants you to leave. Everybody wants you gone. Everybody hates you. You have to leave. Everybody wants you to die. You're going to go to hell. All of these horrible things, right? And eventually he just couldn't handle that anymore. And that's when he came home.
Oh, and thank goodness that he felt comfortable enough to come home and supported.
Mhm.
I mean, he must have felt very supported to be able to come home.
He did. I mean, we'd struggled a lot because he was doing a lot of things that, were not healthy for him. And
Yes.
I am not, shy to say, hey, no, that's not happening here. But, but he always knew he could come home. That was always a given. And, but he said to me, he said, he didn't think that we wanted him either.
Oh,
But he said, but you have to help me because you're my mom. And, so yeah. And then just always from there, just always saying, like, I never leave him without saying, I love you, because I never know when he's thinking, but I
yes.
don't. Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Oh, what a terrible feeling to think that everybody dislikes you and everybody's against you and nobody
mhm,
wants you around. I mean, oh my goodness, I just can't even imagine.
mhm.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's often the when people hear voices, they're most often, some of them aren't, some of them are very friendly and nice, and you can have lovely conversation. And then other voices, for the most part, usually are tormenting you.
Yeah.
And it's not just a voice, quite often it's several voices. So what he says is, when it's happening, it's like if you're in a crowded restaurant and there's just that, all this noise, like all these conversations going on, but it's like that. It's loud.
Mm.
But he can sort of decipher, he knows what they're saying, kind of thing. And
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That would be frustrating to have to deal with that on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Yeah, to say the least. Yeah. And then I think I remember when he went missing
Hmm.
in your
Yes.
story,
Yes.
and you did have to call the police,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
they were able to find him.
Hmm.
Yeah, and he was walking out of a very cold river in the month of January.
Hmm. Yes. Yeah.
But thank goodness he was cooperative. That he
Yes.
didn't fight, and I guess he must have known that they were there to help him.
I guess so. Yeah, his personality is somewhat of like, he's not really a fighter anyways. Like,
Right.
and that was the thing that I noticed with him, was he is always very pretty compliant, very sweet kid, like wonderful, sweet boy. And then all of a sudden just became very combative, but not physically, never physically.
Right.
But just, wouldn't do, the everyday things that, people need to do. And um so yeah, that was a scary time. And that was one of the times, because we didn't know, I didn't know. Um I phoned for an ambulance. I thought he needs an ambulance, right?
Right.
Because he's needs to go to the hospital, and the ambulance says, and we can't do anything about it. You have to phone the police. And so yeah, the police come, they have to cuff him, put him in the squad car, take him to the hospital, and he's basically not under arrest per se, but he's now held. He cannot do anything.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
he's such a sweet man that he would go willing. He's not rude, or
Right.
it's just
Right.
it's just not in him. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah, he went
Yeah.
willingly,
Yeah.
luckily.
And so was he? So he was obviously went on, I'm assuming, medication
Yes.
that did, and it did help him.
Eventually, yes, because when that happened, he had been on medication, but it wasn't doing anything. And so there's several different medications for schizophrenia, and everybody's different. So one thing will work for one person and something else will work for somebody else, but it's kind of a hit and miss. It's an educated guess as to what to use next. They have certain ones that they kind of always start out with. They're milder, there's less side effects, and then they just work their way up from there. And and so he finally got on one where the voices are gone. He got, so there's something else with schizophrenia. It's called flat affect. So it's basically, there's no emotion in your face. You don't smile, you don't look excited, you just, there's like no emotion. It's just an empty, emotionless, black-eyed, haunted face is what it is. And so a lot of the medications don't touch that part of it. They don't bring your your affect, your regular affect back. So but his did. So there was, the day where, he's all of a sudden I saw a smile and it was like, oh my gosh, he smiled, right? I mean, you wouldn't think I mean, you do that when they're tiny babies, right? That first smile, but that first smile from there was probably way more exciting than the first one that I ever had. So
why do you think it is then that a lot of folks with schizophrenia do go off their medications? Because it seems like that, I was doing a little bit of research over the last few days, and it seems like that's quite a problem.
yes, it is. And it's because of the side effects. So a lot of the medications, they make them extremely tired.
Mm.
And even when they're awake, they're just out of it. So it gives you foggy brain. It's very hard to do anything. It's hard to get motivated to do anything. It's really hard to go to school when you're like got foggy brain. And a lot of people, their dreams and aspirations are they want to go to university. And so it's a hard thing to do. It's also hard to go to work when you're so heavily medicated. And sometimes the amount they have to take in order to get rid of the voices is so much that now they are just heavily medicated. So that's one thing. And, you can find a balance with that. Another thing is a lot of medications cause incredible weight gain. So they all of a sudden, and then so that's a health risk as well.
Yes.
And also for their self-esteem, right? That now this medication is making them obese. And there's also some of the medications will cause jerky movements. They cause drooling. They cause erectile dysfunction. They cause like there's just so many things like that. Like there's so many really unpleasant side effects. Mm-hmm. And so for some people they just keep thinking, and there's still that thing about I'm not really sick. So they start feeling good and then they think, okay, I'm done. I'm good. I'm all better. Right. So then they want to go off, but then it comes back and then they get better again. And this is what's happened with my son as well, is that, every time he would get better, he's like, okay, I'm good now. I don't need it anymore. I don't think I need it anymore. And then he'd go off and it would get really bad again. And the difficult part with that is, you got to find that balance, right? Where the medication is working well enough. So maybe you're not going to get rid of the voices entirely, but maybe you can quiet them enough that you can ignore them, and still have life. There's got to be some sort of a balance. But a lot will just give up because it's just like they're not willing to deal with that. And they also think I'm better now, so I don't need it anymore. I should be able to handle this because everybody else can handle their life. Why can't I handle my life? Why would I need to be on medication for the rest of my life? And I've tried to help with that a little bit because I have two things that I take medication for. One is I have a thyroid issue, but the other is my depression. So, like my depression is something I will just take medication for the rest of my life because I have tried to go off and it wasn't good. And, it's fair enough. I think that, it's not worth it. Is like, why not just take the medication and be happy?
Yes.
And not feel so horrible all the time. So, so I try to,
it sounds like a pretty heavy. I mean, the medication that is needed to help sounds really life-changing as well.
It
Yeah.
is. It is. Yeah. So it's kind of like, you know, what are you going to choose? The worse or the worser?
Right.
Right?
Yes. Oh no, for sure.
That's not even grammatically correct, but you know what I mean?
No, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what can parents do to help themselves then if they're dealing, if they've got, is there self-help groups, or what is it that people need as the supporters,
Yeah.
the
So
caregivers?
as part of the support team, you need to educate yourself as much as you can about what schizophrenia is and talk to other parents. So there's support groups. So the BC Schizophrenia Society has education programs. They have support groups and different programs. They have programs, like they'll do programs for siblings and as well, which is great help because and that's a different dynamic, right?
Of course.
And they also do a lot of I think that if you are advocating for it, it makes you feel like at least you're doing something, because
Right.
there's not a whole lot you can do other than just be supportive. And sometimes that looks like, when they're really ill, that looks like dealing with the fact that they smell horrible because they haven't showered in a month. Their room is disgusting, and you're the one that's going to have to go in and clean it because they cannot even find the motivation to do it. And just, you know, it's a real balancing act with encouraging them to take their medication and not coming across as being bossy or telling them what to do. So I mean, that's another thing. And I think that parents talking to each other can help with that, because I can say, okay, this is what I did. Like, I basically, when when we found the doctors that were going to help him, I said, okay, you guys are going to be the bad guys now, because I have to start being the good guy. Otherwise, he's not going to come back to me.
Right.
I'm gonna lose him, like, and he'll be gone, because there were times where he was like, get ready to get on a bus and go to Vancouver because he was just going to live homeless.
Yeah.
And so I said, I have to be the good guy now. But then we had our ways where I would phone them up and say, okay, this is happening. So next time he's in, ask us about it, and then we'll talk about it.
Yes.
Right.
That's
And
fabulous.
it's like it's almost like learning to be extremely manipulative,
Yeah.
but for good, right?
Yeah.
But you really do have to learn to shut up when at the right time, and be vocal at the right time, but be vocal in a positive and encouraging way.
Yes. Oh no, for
So
sure.
still getting your point across, right?
Yes. No,
I
of
know
course. Of
it's
course.
so
It sounds difficult. It sounds,
it is.
yeah,
And
and
it's not
very,
something everyone can do,
no,
because
no.
there's so many people that, like, they just can't sit back and watch that happen. They get angry if you haven't showered. It's like, why do I have to smell this? And it's like, well, I get that. I mean, it's not pleasant.
No.
But I also trying to put myself in his shoes. And
Yes.
maybe I could a little bit more because I was dealing with the depression, and I knew
Yeah.
how hard to feel any motivation to do anything was.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, that must have been very difficult on you to have depression and to be dealing,
Mhm.
with what your son was going through.
Mhm.
Yeah, very difficult to deal with that.
Mhm.
Those- Yeah. So, wow. So what advice do you have then to, if somebody is listening to us talk right now and maybe they're experiencing some of these issues that your son was experiencing, what kind of advice would you have for somebody like that? Not necessarily
Yeah.
the parents, but the person themselves.
Yeah. Well, you know, the best thing is get education. So if you're feeling off, I think number one, if you're feeling off, then talk to your parents, because they're going to be your advocates. And if you get ill enough that you cannot speak for yourself, then they're the ones that have to speak for you. So make sure you get together a support team, whether it's your parents or you know, whatever, whoever it is. You need to make sure that you've got a support team and tell people what's going on. For parents or loved ones of somebody who's ill, there is help out there. It's hard to find sometimes, and so finding that hub where, if you're in British Columbia, there's the BC Schizophrenia Society. It's really easy to find. It's bcss.org, and you connect with them. They have these amazing clinicians that are all over the province, and you connect with them. They can connect you with other with everybody that you need, anything that you need. They can answer questions. They have the education system programs that you need. Educate yourself.
Yeah.
Educate yourself, educate yourself, educate yourself. And always, always, always know that as a parent, you know your child better than the psychiatrist or the caseworker.
Mm-hmm.
Do not ever let them tell you something that you know in your heart is not right. You know, you have to follow your gut, follow, you know, your child, you know, your loved one, your husband, or whatever, you know. And so you have to stand up and fight for them. You have to. I mean, I call it advocating for them, but you're literally going to duke it out sometimes with some people about things. And so do it. Don't be afraid to do it. And also never, ever, ever give up hope. There's always something else to try. There's always someone else to speak to. There's always something else. And eventually you will find the thing that you need. And so never, never, I know that, you know, it can be a couple of years, 3 years can go by and you feel like you've done everything. There's nothing else to try, but there's always something. There's always something.
Wow. I know that I have a friend, and her daughter, she's in her early 20s, and she was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she wouldn't take her medication, and they ran into all sorts of problems. And as difficult as it was for them, and then the dad started getting fearful, just some of the things she was saying, some of the way she was acting. He was starting to feel unsafe. So he called the police. It was horrible for him to do. And the judge committed her in a hospital. And then the judge took control and said, look here, Missy, if you are not going to take your medication, you are not getting out. And so then, and this is in Ontario. So she eventually did, of course, and got much better. And so, but she was actually had to follow up with the court system. And I mean, how, you know, I know that it was horrible for them to have to do that. But you know what? She's got a boyfriend. She's on her medication. She's got a part-time job. She goes to movies. She's actually going out, and it just got to that point where I don't know what to do here.
Help.
Somebody help me. And the court took control. And I just really think, you know, on two ends of that, the strength it must have taken for them to do that, you know, and they did it out of love.
Yeah. And that's a hard thing to do, because it's pretty hard to put your faith in another system with your child. But good for them that they did that. It's we did eventually at one point, we knew he wouldn't be alive much longer if we didn't do something drastic. And we basically had him recommitted. And then we had to step back and say, we won't take him back. You guys have to deal with him. And he was an adult at that point, so it wasn't like a guardianship, giving over guardianship. But yeah, basically he was held. He was certified held. He went through several different places, and eventually, you know, was on the medication. And that's a thing when they're at least in the hospital or something. Now, your regular hospitals, they're pretty much a revolving door.
Of course,
So it's
yes.
pretty hard to get any help from them. The one thing that you kind of have to do, and it's a horrible thing, and some people get so angry at you when you even suggest doing this, but it's what we had to do. Is you have to say, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. And try walking away from your child as they're standing there at the door going, but I want to come home. It's like I would bawl every time I left him. I would, like, the door would close and I'd lose it. And but I knew that was the only way my son would still be around. And it wasn't by any means us turning our back on him. We saw him like as often as we could and all that. Like, he knew we loved him, but we said, we can't have you back, Kai. Because you're gonna die. You're just gonna you're gonna be gone. So yeah.
And I guess that's I guess that's almost the last straw, but it has to be done. Like,
it has to be done. And
has to be
the thing is that you don't even like the really big thing to know is that the intervention, the ability to have them recover as much as possible depends on timing. It has to be done as soon as possible. The longer they're ill, the more damaged their brain is, the more trauma to their brain. And the brain it is amazing and can come back. But every time they have an episode or, that trauma happens to their brain, it's a little bit less that it'll come back. So every time they go off their meds and go back rock bottom again and then come back on their meds, they won't come back to the point that they were previously. They lose cognitive abilities, so they'll lose a lot of their memories maybe, or just abilities. And so it's really, really important that you have to kind of do it as early as possible, like get them into a program as early as possible.
Yeah.
There is a program called EPI, and it's actually it's run out of the hospitals, and it's early psychosis intervention, and that's the first thing I found, and that's what saved his life. And then from there, then you can connect with the BC Schizophrenia Society, and they will continue on. But the BC Schizophrenia Society can also direct you to them. So
yeah, I didn't realize that. And so does that not even put more of an urgency in getting it dealt with, so that there isn't that damage that happens? And because I agree, I think our brains are very healthy and we come back from a lot of things, but when it's been damaged time and time again, very important to get that help as quickly as you can. Wow, Guelda, well, what an important conversation that we have had. And I want to just really thank you for sharing your story and your son's story in the book, and be willing to, obviously you're wanting to help others with your own experience. And I hope that this helps. I hope that this reaches out and helps people, and that they can go ahead and get some help as well. I know that you've started a blog recently. I know it's not out yet, but it'll be out there. So hopefully that will help others as well. And so if anybody would like to pick up the book and read Guelda's story, it's amazing. And if you're experiencing, or your loved ones are experiencing anything like this, I just know now from the conversation that we've had that it is so important to reach out and get help, and in any way that they can. Yeah. So do you have anything you want to say in closing before we sign off?
Yeah, so if one way that they can get in touch with me, if someone has questions, I am happy to speak to you. I'm happy to, encourage you and just be another person to, vent to even. I mean, so, honestly, you need a lot of someone you can just cry with, yell at, to get through this. But my blog, the URL is schizophreniamomwarrior.com. Not at .com.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and there's a contact page on there that you can just message me, and
Well,
yeah.
you know what we'll do is when we're done and I'm getting this ready to go out, I'm going to in the details section, I'll have that available
Okay, that'd
for
be
them.
great.
Yeah, and I maybe will put the link to the BC Schizophrenia Association in there as well,
Yes,
or any little tidbits that we could put in there that would help.
absolutely. Yes.
But you're such a wealth of information, and you're so enlightened, and you're so unbelievably open, which I think is so helpful, because so often we hide in shame and all those other things. So I appreciate all of that in you, and that is what really makes you a wonderful advocate. And certainly I hope anyone who's really struggling will reach out to you so that you
Yeah.
can help to direct them in the right way, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
doing this, and we will talk soon.
Thank you so much.
Okay, take
Okay,
care.
bye.
Bye.